Believe me, if I started murdering people, there'd be none of them left.
We are all evil in some form or another.
I am not guilty.
On a crisp February evening in 1980, on a college campus in Mobile, Alabama, the campus of University of South Alabama, it was alive with classes, friendship parties, and dreams for the future. Among them is 18-year-old Katherine Elizabeth Foster, a bright-eyed freshman from Pascagoula, Mississippi. From this campus, Katherine vanished. Katherine Elizabeth, or Kathy or Kate, Foster grew up in Pascagoula, Mississippi, which is a coastal town, the beloved daughter of Walker and Margaret Foster, and part of a tight-knit Catholic school community that would remember her for decades as someone who was kind, studious, and very deeply loved. She had been born March 11th, 1961. She was a conscientious girl, not just about her studies, but also in how she carried herself and how she kept her clothing very neat and orderly. She was naturally confident and wore a little bit of makeup that was always impeccably applied and kept her hair very simple. Her choice of college in Alabama was close enough to be familiar to her, yet far enough away to feel like it was something new and challenging and just scary enough to motivate her to kind of grow up. Alabama was only a little bit west of her hometown of Pascagoula, but Katherine hadn't come to campus alone. Her childhood friend Jamie Kellum had made the move as well. And the girls were close, and although they hadn't been able to secure a dorm room together, they were able to spend lots of time together and were often seen around in each other's company. Another person that had followed Katherine to school in Alabama was her longtime boyfriend, Jim, whom she kind of planned on marrying when they graduated school, both of them. On Friday, February 21st, 1980, Katherine was walking towards her dormitory. She had made plans to meet with some friends that evening, and being a campus, getting from one area to the next was pretty easy walking distances. It was exam season and the term was nearing their spring break, so partying would have to wait a little bit. This was just a meet-up for like a casual coffee or a trip to the movies. But that night she never met up with the friends that she had made plans with. They waited for her, but she never showed up. Now, Katherine was not the flaky type, so they started wandering the campus looking for her right away. And as they searched, they were asking friends and some other students, and within just a few hours, they had a group of about 50 kids that were searching. They were knocking on dorm doors, looking in all the common areas, the cafeteria, and some of the known shortcuts that were between the buildings, and they found nothing. They searched throughout the night, and fear was starting to kind of creep in as each hour passed. There were basically dozens of flashlights cutting through the darkness at this time. And as the sun made its morning appearance just over the horizon, one of the searchers finds her. She was laying on her back in a wooded area that was still technically within the campus gates. She was still neatly dressed, and her hair was flowing in waves around her head, showing signs of being recently brushed. But it was matted with blood. Now, her makeup was still impeccably applied, but there were 2 gunshot wounds in her head. One was in the side and one behind her ear. There were no signs of sexual assault and no trauma other than the 2 gunshot wounds, no defensive wounds, and the investigators had found it odd that her clothing and her hair and makeup and everything were still so neatly done. There was absolutely no signs of any struggle whatsoever, not even like dirt or grass on the knees of her pants. And as one summary of the original investigative notes puts it, her hair was brushed, her makeup done, and her clothes clean and neat. She had been executed and likely had not even seen it coming. The medical examiner put her time of death at approximately between midnight and 2 a.m. She had obviously been targeted, but why. So sometime between her walking back to her dorm and when the searchers started to sort of fan out, she had encountered someone that she had trusted enough to either approach or walk with or take a ride with, and that someone had pulled a gun on her, shot her twice, and then left her. None of her personal effects were missing, and she had not been assaulted in any way. So it didn't fit like a random attack at all. But there was no evidence, no witnesses, so they just had nothing to really go on. Now, 5 days later, on the 17th, the police had searched the pond that was near where Katherine had been found, and the dive team did come up with a .22 caliber pistol, which they were hopeful would be their murder weapon, but ballistics would come back to it not being a match to the gun that had been used to kill Katherine. So they started to work victimology, like who was Katherine, and more importantly, who did she know and who did she hang out with? So they questioned her friend Jamie and the friends that she was going to meet up with that night. And of course, they talked to Jim. They wanted to know, like, maybe did she have a secret life or another boyfriend, maybe? Her investigative file started to fill up with notes and some interview transcripts, but nothing of any value to finding who had killed Katherine. For Katherine's parents, the waiting for answers was torturous. They had a daughter that was frozen in time at 18 who had simply just never come home from college. Sometime in early 1983, there was a man named Michael Maris who was found in his home having died by suicide. They had done a welfare check on him. Michael had been a security guard on the campus and a rather unsettling figure, you could say. In his home, along with his body, they found a rather extensive collection of newspaper clippings regarding Katherine's murder, including, rather disturbingly, her autopsy report and these poems that Michael had written himself about her. Now, if that wasn't ominous enough, they also discovered a locked room in his garage that had no windows and contained this mattress. But as creepy and suspicious as this finding was, they were able to determine that Michael Maris had not been anywhere near the campus on the night of Katherine's murder. Turns out he was just a creepy guy with a weird true crime obsession. Well, not like our regular weird true crime obsession, but like really weird. Like the not fun kind of weird. So Katherine Foster's murder became a cold case, and cases can go cold for a lot of different reasons. But in Katherine's case, the fact that there was no weapon found at all, the scene had no signs of a sexual or a financial motive, and of course, the passage of time, witnesses' memories start to fade, that doesn't help. Now, I do have to give it to the police at the time for not just closing the case after Michael and his weird collection appeared. They did actually do the work and ruled him out and then kept the case open at least. So detectives were cycled through, coming on and off of the case. There were some fragments of tips that were entered into her file and then some were lost from her file. And Katherine's parents went on just enduring really the hardest kind of waiting, which is waiting without any answers, while students who had known her grew up and left Mobile, including her once boyfriend and best friend Jamie. Katherine's very presence on the campus just kind of became a bit of folklore. The Fosters had to learn a new path forward, and everyone except Katherine continued to grow up. Like her friends got married, they had kids of their own, and of course Katherine did not. Jim eventually moved on and got married. He created a life for himself, and so did Jamie. But Jamie, who later becomes Jamie Kellum Letson, she had become troubled after the death of her friend and started to get into some minor scraps with the law and developed an issue with alcohol. And this issue with drinking led her to at times living in shelters and just kind of floundering around in life. She was depressed and confused. Well, finally, in and around 2007 or 2008, she decided it was time to get her life on track. She was now in her 40s. She had kids of her own that she had not really been the most present mother for, so it was time. So Jamie entered an AA program to get herself clean, and she started working the steps. And she definitely worked those steps. Like, if you aren't familiar with AA, there are 12 steps altogether, and you're supposed to work them in order. So let me just quickly read them to you to sort of refresh your memory on it if you're not familiar with it. So step 1 is to admit that you're powerless over alcohol and that your lives have become unmanageable. 2, come to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore us to sanity. 3, make a decision to turn your will and your life over to the care of God as we understand him. 5, admit to God, ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, entirely be ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. 7, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. 8, make a list of all persons we have harmed and become willing to make amends to them all. 9, make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we are wrong, promptly admit it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And then 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. Jamie got to step 8, and then she made her list of people that she had harmed. And as anyone in recovery would, she discovered about herself that there were quite a few people that she had been deeply close to from her past and her present that she had harmed. And on this list was Katherine. They had been close friends in school, and Jamie had held on to a secret about Katherine's boyfriend ever since her death. So when ready to tackle step 9, she decided to pen this letter to Katherine as her amends. Like, she knew that Katherine would never actually read the letter, but it was a way of purging her brain of the guilt and sort of shame of her secret that she had kept. She gave the letter to her sponsor and then continued on with her steps to further her recovery. When her sponsor read the letter, she herself faced a bit of a dilemma, like an ethical one. She was now faced with the weight of what was literally now in her hands, and was she to keep what was said in AA within AA, because it is Alcoholics Anonymous, or let the police know. Now, in the end, she chose to do the right thing and then handed the letter over to the police. And that's a bit curious. So what did this letter say? Well, don't worry, I tracked down a copy of it. Now, it is handwritten, so you have to kind of bear with me as I try to decipher the old school cursive that she's used here. Dear Katherine, after all these years I have come to you. It is me, Jamie, the girl who took your life. I don't know where to begin. I was your friend, but I was obsessed with Jim, and you were in my way. For what it's worth, Jim hated me after your death. Although no one could ever prove that I shot you, everyone knew I was obsessed with Jim and had manipulated my way into his life, and I think many people suspected that I killed you. I am wanting to tell you how my life was shattered after this. In some ways, this one horrible act, I destroyed 2 lives, yours and my own. But as I write, I realize that even now, when I come here to sort things out with you, that I'm being selfish. Kate, I'm actively aware of what I did that day. In ending your life, I robbed your family and loved ones of a future with you. Only God knows what you might have contributed. At the very least, I robbed you of the chance to experience a full life. No children, no fulfilling career, and the opportunity to continue in the path you were on and grow in God's love. You were a good girl, a good Catholic. You cared about people. You were going to Ireland to work with the children in the area, going to try and bring peace to the communities. You had traveled to Mexico to help the poor in Saltillo. I wiped out all of the good in one evil, selfish moment. I came here to make amends to you, but there is no way I can make amends for killing you. There is no way to make things right, but at least I want you to know that I realize what a horrible thing I did, And also, for what it's worth, I want you to know that I live my life every day under this, and I realize that no good will ever come of me because I have this mark in my soul from when I killed you. Your children are affected. It is a sickness that grows and affects everyone I come in contact with. I have often thought, Kate, that to make things right, I should take my life. But I am too afraid, and I think that even as broken as I am, that my children need me. So, Kate, I am sorry for what I robbed you of and the pain I caused your family, especially your mother, frankly, who is probably the greatest woman I have ever known. I don't know what else there is to say, Katie, so goodbye. So that's a thing. And when the police were handed this little tidbit, the investigators went back and then re-looked at the file. They reviewed the initial interviews and realized that what Jamie had said in her letter had actually lined up with the evidence that they did have. So nearly 30 years after Katherine Foster had missed her plans with her friends, Jamie Kellum, one of her dearest friends, was arrested and indicted for Katherine's murder. She was actually living in a homeless shelter in Jackson, Mississippi when she was arrested. She waived her right to extradition to Alabama, and her bond was set at $500,000. Now, for reasons that I don't really know or understand, she pled not guilty, which actually I understand that part because it's kind of a what have you got to lose thing to plead not guilty up front. It usually means then that the DA's office might offer some kind of reduced charge or sentence if you later plead guilty. So if you do murder someone, which I do not suggest you do, don't plead guilty right away. I think that that's normal advice that a lawyer would give you, but I'm surprised that she let the case go to trial on a not guilty plea, considering that her very words would say that the guilt had actually been eating her up for years.
Well, Bob and Lenise, that hearing is still going on. Jamie Letson is accused of killing Katherine Foster in 1980. Foster's body was found in a wooded area near the University of South Alabama. Today, Letson's defense attorneys are asking Judge Michael Youngpeter to throw out statements she made to investigators who came to pick her up in Jackson, Mississippi. Now, the state maintains that Letson made those comments voluntarily and freely to investigators. The state also said Letson waived her right to attorney when she did talk.
A sheriff's deputy led Jamie Letson into the courtroom. She sat quietly listening to motions. Letson is facing murder charges from a crime back in February 1980. Authorities say Letson murdered Katherine Foster. They say Letson shot Foster twice in a wooded area on the University of South Alabama's campus. The investigation was later reopened, and Letson was arrested in Mississippi in 2008. During that car ride back to Mobile, officials say she made several statements. This week, her attorney, Chris Klotz, asked the judge to throw out those statements. In today's hearing, Judge Michael Youngpeter ruled on several motions regarding her confession. Prosecutors with the Alabama Attorney General's office say Letson made voluntary statements to them about murdering Foster and also waived her right to an attorney. The prosecution said it even has Letson's audio confession. Judge Youngpeter did not allow confessions made to police. That motion was suppressed, but will allow 4 confessions Letson made to lay people. The judge also ruled that a handwritten confession by Letson would be admissible.
When her case did go to trial in 2010, the prosecution led a narrative that laid out their theory of the crime that had happened 30 years earlier. Jamie and Katherine were old friends from back home and from school, and Jamie resented Katherine because of her long-term boyfriend, Jim, and wanted her out of the way, which was a phrase that kind of encapsulated jealousy as a motive without having to prove any particular fight that had happened or any kind of threat that had happened on that February night. Now, the reason Katherine's hair was brushed and her face was so composed, they suggest, is that she had been walking to meet her friends when Jamie had, someone that she had trusted, had pulled up, maybe waved, and then offered her a ride. There was no struggle because there was no reason to struggle. So Katherine got into Jamie's car, and then Jamie had lured her into these woods that were just kind of off the campus road and then shot her twice. They had the letter, they had the sponsor to testify as well.
Prosecutors from the state attorney general's office continued to present their case today. Jurors heard from two different witnesses who say that Jamie Letson confessed to shooting and killing University of South Alabama freshman Katherine Foster back in 1980. They got to know Letson while helping her through the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program. They say she confessed to the crime during counseling sessions. Patrick Shannon testified it was during a small group session in 2001 that Letson admitted to taking the victim, Katherine Foster, to show her something. While on the walk, she took her into the woods and shot her twice in the head. Letson told him she wanted Foster's boyfriend and that she felt little emotion after the murder. Shannon said he called Mobile police after the confession, but heard nothing back from them until 2005, over 4 years later.
The letter speaks for itself, and of course, obviously, the best evidence is the letter itself. And as you aptly pointed out, the letter is addressed to Katherine. It was read to Katherine, and as you said, it opens up, "Dear Katherine, I'm Jamie, the girl who took your life."
Now, the defense did the best that they could with what they had to work with. They challenged the reliability of some of the old memories that witnesses had, the authenticity of the letter itself, the chain of custody of said letter, and then, of course, suggested that Michael Miras was the security guard, was probably the one that had done it, even though he had a tight alibi, because it's pretty easy to blame a dead guy after all. And besides, they had no weapon, and Jamie was her friend. Like, why would she kill her friend and then write about it? To them, they said that was just silly.
Jamie Letson's attorney, Chris Klotz, told the jury this morning that Jamie is prone to making up fantastic stories. He also said as her drug and alcohol problem escalated, her stories got more elaborate.
There's a history that Jamie has embellished stories to friends, and there will be people who will testify to that at trial.
A member of Letson's Alcoholics Anonymous class encouraged her to write the letter, and that it has no meaning. The defense tried to point the jury away from Letson. They brought up Michael Miras, a USA security officer, killed himself 3 years after Katherine died.
We're prepared, and it's like I said in my opening statement. The individual that was mentioned is somebody who has absolutely no connection whatsoever with the victim in this case. There's no evidence whatsoever that Katherine Foster ever met this man, ever had any contact with him whatsoever.
But none of the tactics that they used worked, and then the jury came back with a guilty verdict in May of 2010. She was then sentenced to life in prison. She appealed, of course, in 2011, and then the verdict and the sentence was upheld. The Attorney General's office later summarized the appellate court's decision saying, quote, Jamie Letson was convicted and sentenced for the murder of 18-year-old Katherine Foster in 1980 when they were both freshman students at the University of South Alabama. And the Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed that conviction, end quote. And as kind of cold and just administrative as that statement kind of sounds and reads, for the Fosters, though, it was everything, because it was the final legal word on this pain that they had carried for way too long, that the person who had killed Katherine had in fact been a friend of hers and not just some faceless drifter. Well, True Crime TV went nuts with the story. They had titles like Blood and Lies and Alibis, but this case wasn't really about the lurid details and scandal and graphic depictions of violence. What made this story so appealing for these dramatic reenactments and TV stuff was that Katherine's story was about trust, that everyone you know is capable of murdering you, like I always like to say. So Katherine's last moments weren't spent struggling against a stranger. They weren't even in fear. They were spent with someone that she knew, someone that she trusted enough to get into a car with. And that betrayal is what makes this crime especially haunting. So her murder was not solved by fancy DNA or like a smoking gun. It was solved because guilt burdened Jamie, and then she finally purged her mind of the truth that she had to tell. And this letter itself, it didn't contain any gory bits. There wasn't any sordid details that were ripe for TV drama, but it did allow the investigators to take this fresh look at the case, test the timeline, and then align the evidence to what Jamie had said in her letter. Now, they say that cold cases are often solved by changes in relationships. And I guess in Jamie's case, it was a change in her relationship with herself that finally got to her. So it did take 30 years, but in the end, Katherine's story was finally told. And with that, I'm going to be back again next week with another terrible, awful case of probably somebody that was trusted and then did something terrible and awful. And in the meantime, you can do your rates, reviews, things. There is Patreon as well, and that includes for the videos. If you sign up for Patreon, you get the videos a little bit early, and they are ad-free as well. And I believe it's about $3 a month for that in US. Anyways, but you don't have to. Whatever you want to do. And as always, thank you so much for watching and for listening.